Hey.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I'm taking up all the space.
Okay.
Alright.
So,
We can start, I guess, just start from the top.
that's all.
Sure.
Just start with the Rothenberg.
Start at the very beginning.
Okay.
So, part 1, the invention of heterosexuality. I guess since I'm talking, I'll just keep talking. Well, from this reading, there's a lot going on, which I thought was interesting. Like in terms of just like heterosexuality, even though I guess people have been propagating, making children for a long time. Like the actual term heterosexuality is like a relatively new concept, and I guess like a theme of the reading would be just like heterosexuality, like, creating like part of a classification system. And just kind of continued on and became more just like the culture per se.
Yeah, and like you were saying, it was like it was the concept. So what I wrote down was it was the concept of heterosexuality is only one particular historical way of perceiving, categorizing, and imagining the social relations of the sexes. And then also from about 1820 to 1860, heterosexuals did not exist, like you mentioned. The middle-class white Americans idealized true womanhood, true manhood, and true love, all categorized by purity.
Mm-hmm.
And then the very black and white manly men and womanly women versus anything on any sort of spectrum at all.
And nothing in between.
No,
It was like
there's
either you are or you aren't.
You're this or you're this or
Yeah.
you're deviant.
Yes.
And that is all. That's all you get.
Yeah, that's kind of spiral too. Like if you weren't like in those two categories, you become deviant and not part of the cultural norms, which like heterosexual and the term homosexual kind of came into play around the same time. Right here, like in 1892, Dr. James Kiernan of Chicago was the first to start creating those polarized like identities of heterosexual and homosexual.
Right. We discussed the mental condition. What was it? I might say this totally wrong. Psychical hermaphroditism, which is the inclination to both sexes.
Mm-hmm. So I guess from like a counseling perspective, I got from this article just being aware of I guess like historical and like systems-based pressures to like for people to be heterosexual or to be cisgender, and to like just be more aware of how people have been pressed into those particular settings and how not everyone fits into those patterns.
Yeah.
Just really, I guess, understand like the deep historical issues that could be behind it. Any other counseling thoughts?
There are so many of these that tie into one another that sometimes I will pull in other things. But I think when we create these categories and they divide, and there's a strong desire to want to be in the majority, so you're not in an outlier, and I think it just perpetuates discrimination, because then if there's somebody who is an outlier, then you're not going to be the target. It almost seems like another protection for the majority. You're safer if there's somebody else in a minority category.
Yeah.
So the categories are important.
And even if you fall into the deviant, what they would call the deviant side of it, then but kind of like, and it, like you said, we blend into other articles as well. But with the Netflix comedy with Hannah Gadsby, and she talked about the fact of like the shame that she felt, and then the fact of like that internalized homophobia, because it's like you actually do fall into the outlier, but you're not going to admit that, so you're going to stay in the category that you've been put in by society.
And she talked about the you're the was that the virgin or the whore?
Yes.
And that's like you have the womanly woman, but pure. And if that's not you, then you're the whore who's going to be portrayed with your boobs out.
Yeah.
In art.
Mm-hmm.
I think that segues into the next one, the homophobia as a weapon of sexism. It very much discusses categorizing an individual in a way to harm them, because this is the one that spoke the most to me, actually, because I have experienced it and it was just so well articulated that there is this ability for and she said, well, we stay in an abusive, male abusers call women lesbians, warning that by resisting him, she is choosing to be outside society's protection from male institutions.
Yes.
And what does a woman have to do to be called a lesbian? Almost anything, sometimes nothing at all, but certainly anything that threatens the status quo, anything that doesn't indicate submission and subordination. And that, for some reason, is the term lesbian is then used as this insult, which is how they said it just puts you in a place to be a target. Mm-hmm. And so it's not just saying, I want to insult you back because you resisted me. Mm-hmm. It is saying, okay, now you're in this category and now you don't get protection and you've done it to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like victim blaming again.
Absolutely.
One thing they mentioned in that article was, they said, who do gender roles serve? Men and the women who seek power from them. Who suffers from gender roles? Women most completely and men in part. How are gender roles maintained? By the weapons of sexism, so economics, violence, and then homophobia. And then it talked also about how gay men are seen as the threat to male dominance and control, and homophobia expressed against them has the same roots in sexism as this homophobia against lesbians. And I thought it was interesting, it talked about how visibly gay men are the object of extreme hatred and fear by heterosexual men because they're breaking ranks with like heterosexual solidarity. Mm-hmm. So it's like if you have a gay man who doesn't have the appearance of being a gay man, then he still falls into, well, he appears, maybe he's probably cisgendered. Like, or he is a straight man, he appears to be a straight man, but he's actually not. Whereas somebody who doesn't appear to be or is visibly gay, then they fall outside the ranks of what is normal or what is okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's even more, like, detested, the fact that you visibly do not look like a man.
Yes. And all of this, as it's written, it's just so well articulated in this, and just seeing it lived out, it always comes back to for some reason, there being a threat to power 100% of the time. If you didn't abide by the status quo, say you divorced your spouse, or say you chose not to be in a relationship with a specific person, you somehow took from them in the way that they feel, and you threatened the power of the individual. So therefore, we're going to call you a name that makes you on the outskirts, and we're going to try to retaliate by then removing protection from you and power from you because we feel threatened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like that by categorizing and stigmatizing people into groups, it just reinforces the gender roles that I was getting at the article, how gender roles are maintained through mentioned economics, violence, and homophobia, and that the constant, oppression. It's really it's a control issue. It's a control thing. For example, like limiting education, training for women, marginalized communities, and not providing the resources and the training that everyone should get. Where I guess I don't have a specific example of a marginalized community, but maybe just like a lower SES area where maybe females are more encouraged to be caretakers of their family members and the male members of their family are encouraged to, go get a job, finish high school, finish college, and there's that bias that comes into play. But I guess from a homophobia perspective, I guess that kind of plays into that too, where if a guy didn't want to do construction, maybe they're more comfortable being, a chef or a baker. I mean, I've worked in restaurants too, and so there's like a different dynamic of how I guess I feel like I've been treated by other people as a guy working, in a cooking type setting versus like, outside, labor, construction type job. And so I could see how there could be like a part of, I guess, the oppression of heterosexuals, men onto like, into that homophobia by just, I don't know, if a guy doesn't seem to fit that typical male classification, they just become another outlier and it just perpetuates.
And if that's one thing that a majority can bond over is having a common target. So it's important to keep targets. So pushing people out, keeping them on the edge, marginalizing. That means that you always have a target, and the target's not you.
I thought that was interesting how I talked about there's two circumstances that make affection between men appropriate, and how it's either extreme sport or competitive sports or war. And in those two circumstances, it's okay for men to be affectionate, but outside of that, it's not. So I thought that was really interesting. They're not seen as real men.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there really aren't too many like emotionally encouraged bonding experiences for men to get together. Usually sports, and that's the negative thing about it too, is because young boys grow up not knowing how to express anxiety, and so they don't know what anxiety is, and so they don't describe it, so it comes out in anger later on. And so like in sports, boys are encouraged to, experience emotions, but they're usually like anger, aggression, like all these negative emotions on like the negative end of the spectrum, instead of, using like joy. It's like, oh, I'm so happy right now, I'm gonna go tackle this guy because this is a lot of fun or something like that. Or, I'm gonna use joy for the game of basketball to try to make a basket. It's usually like the coach is like, oh, get that inner like anger or bring it out and use that on the court and something like that, which it's completely counterintuitive, where they learn how to like access the negative without like being able to communicate it. I feel sad, I feel anxious, I feel worried about something, and typical heterosexual tough guy male advice is, just deal with it. Have thicker skin. You should be thicker skin. And just there's a balance, I guess. You gotta be, tough at some point and not, let words hurt. You just gotta keep moving forward.
I appreciate you saying that, because that's a perspective I couldn't have. As a woman, just you're not allowed to be affectionate, and then you're not allowed to release emotion until it's time to be aggressive, and then you save it all up, and that is your only outlet, the only acceptable outlet.
Yeah. I guess it's what it feels like. Is that, thanks for sharing. It feels nice to be heard.
And then also, the biggest insults were whore and lesbian.
Yeah.
For a woman.
Kind of like in the Netflix special,
Right.
talking about the virgin or the whore.
Yep.
Yeah, the dichotomy, there's no in between, there's no spectrum of gender identities or sexual identities. It's all either this or that, or you're out person.
And also talking about when it comes to sexual identity development and wanting, like, it talks about some people want to really understand it, but the reason for wanting to understand it is so they know where to eliminate it. Is really know, like, if we can say this is the age where sexual development, as far as like sexual orientation really starts to take hold, then maybe we can, if we can pinpoint it, then we can stop it and we can make it the way that we want it to be.
Yeah, I remember reading
Yeah.
that part where it's like they're like trying to use the understanding of the development instead of using it in a positive way to help kids. They're trying to be like, oh, at this particular point of development, they might become more likely to become homosexual. So they're trying to find like, some kind of preventative, control it.
Yeah.
But you can't control genetics. You can't control, billions of people being born.
Well, in the against bullying, which we'll talk about in a minute, but I remember him writing, what would it be like to live in a culture where we say, I hope my son's gay, and that nobody is imagining their future spouse and what gender the spouse would be. And
I wrote that one down too.
Yeah, that was similar to what you're saying, as opposed to, oh my goodness, that might indicate that they might be gay, so we're going to just squelch it as much as we can right now.
We can move on to the next one.
Yeah.
He defies you still. Unless, was there something else?
No,
Okay.
I feel like I'm ready to move to the next one.
Okay. Because I can't remember, I think this was one either we had to read for the gender one, or I don't remember if it was one we had to read or if I read it as a choice, but I remember reading it.
Yes,
I read it as a choice.
Okay.
In the past, I hadn't read this one, so it must have
been a choice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this was heavy. The first time I read it and this time were, just like males, if they're effeminate or unmasculine, maybe potentially target as gay. They may not even come out yet, and just by being less masculinized, the stereotypical masculine, they become a target, and just like that, there's a theme of seclusion and verbal and physical abuse which these kids experience, and whatever. The article provides examples and scenes. Well, it was broken down into scenes, which was interesting too. It wasn't just narratives, snapshots of this person's life, and I thought it was uplifting that towards the end he was able to find another group of people that he does find things in common with, being able to march in the parade in the gay rights parade, but this was. It was sad. It's tough stuff. Just seeing how these personal boundaries are just completely violated.
And I think mentioning the parade, I think that was a helpful shift to an explanation for why that is so valuable and so important from all those years. I mean, it's just honestly sounds like psychological torture, being legitimately physically tortured and having to hide in your own skin and hide from your family, and then finally having community when you never, and an acceptance that you never had in your entire life, an environment where people aren't prepared to hurt you. I think that's important to note when talking to people who don't want to understand what a gay pride parade's about.
Yeah.
And
how your whole life.
Right, and why that. Because I have heard people say, well, there's no straight pride parade. You're right, there's not. Absolutely, there's not. And here's why this is important.
Yeah.
And I think that was really just the kind of stark turn at the end with that final scene.
Which it could have kept going on. Like just the writing. That was almost the beginning of something else.
Yes.
And so it's there could have been another piece to it, added to it. But it's the same concept, when people say, well, why isn't there a White History Month? I'm like, well, let me tell you. Kind of when people say, why isn't there a straight pride? I'm like, well, let me tell you why not. Every day is straight pride.
Yeah, every month is a White History Month.
One thing that they mentioned, which I remember mentioning this also when we did the gender and oppression one, about how they never learned about gay history. They learned about Michelangelo and Oscar Wilde and Gertrude Stein, but they never learned that they were gay. They just learned about the art. I'm going to keep going back to it. The Netflix special, when she talked about with Picasso, and they would always say, separate the man from the art. And it's well, would they buy his art if Picasso's name wasn't attached to it? They would have never bought it. So you can't separate the man from the art. The man is the art. And so you can't separate the two. So, I I was an English major, so a lot of the stuff she mentioned, even though I wasn't an art major,
Mm.
I learned about a lot of the art because it was attached to the literature.
Mm.
So yeah, I learned about, especially like Oscar Wilde. I remember the first time I was in undergrad, it's the first time I ever heard that he was gay. I didn't know that in high school or anything. So, and even when we mentioned it, we talked about it a little bit, but we didn't talk about his life being gay. We mentioned like a little bit about the fact like, yeah, he was ostracized a little bit later in his life and everything, that he even went to jail for it. But other than that, we mostly talked about his literature. And so it's like, I don't like the concept of separating the man from the art. Like, you need to understand the man to understand the art.
Right. That was such an influence on his whole, everything about him as the artist and the writer. And I remember I went to it was in a theater magnet, music magnet school. And so we did read a lot of Oscar Wilde, and we did know that, and that wasn't something that, if it weren't a theater class, would have been just swept. Like, okay, yes, he's gay, and then we move on and just talk about the literature, which there's still some sort of desire for that not to be allowed to be a part of the discussion when it's such a valuable part of the discussion. Yeah.
Which makes you wonder, like, well, not wonder, obviously we know why, but the fact of, like, why can't we mention he was gay? Like, he was gay. Like, why is that a big deal to mention in a curriculum? But then that also goes into the Ryan Skipper, when they talked about the fact that everybody in the community knew, but nobody really talked about it. Yeah. Like, and then when they mentioned also, sorry, I'm jumping, but talked about how that play that was made after Matthew Shepard was murdered, I can't remember what the name of it is. I wrote it down. But it was a play that the Polk District would not allow their theater departments to put on because it was based off of the murder of Matthew Shepard. And so that's huge. It's like, why wouldn't you?
But then it's oppressing the truth and controlling the facts.
But they turn around and say that but the district didn't want to allow the theater departments to put on this play because it was about Matthew Shepard. But when you turn it around, the two people who are accused of murdering Ryan Skipper are products of the Polk District school. So what are they bringing them up in? Just this homophobic environment that says we're not going to learn about them, but it's okay to murder them because we're not going to talk about their humanity and how they're people.
And we feel threatened by it.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a good point. Anything else about He Defies You Still?
One of the last lines, I think, towards the end of it, said, on the other hand, anyone can be a faggot. It's a catch-all. If you did something that didn't conform to what was acceptable behavior of the group, then you risk being called one. So, and it goes back to what we read before, even with the gender thing about, like, manhood and how it's, like, the biggest fear that men have is other men, and other men, whether it's violence, physical, or being called gay. So, I mean, so that makes sense. It's a catch-all. If you do anything that doesn't conform to what's acceptable manhood, or really anything, you risk being called a lesbian, gay, whatever. Being equated to female, because that's weak. So...
Yeah. Not sure. I was gonna say, I guess a lot of this material, like, it's heavy stuff that unless somebody identifies as being in the LGBTQ community, they don't really connect their personal emotions with what these individuals are experiencing. So sometimes, I'm usually pretty talkative. I don't know, because I know quite a few people over the years that, when I was younger, they, identified as heterosexual, and now they identify as homosexual men. And I'm happy that they're finding that balance in their life now with the current political climates being more positive, but at the same time things are now presently more negative. The previous administration is more positive. But just everything that we've been covering just gives a whole new perspective like one of my Sunday school teachers growing up, we kind of maybe speculated he might have been not heterosexual, but it was nothing that was an issue. And now he, lives in New York. He's out of the closet, and I wanted to reach out to him. I reached out to him several times, just to talk and catch up, and it's been nice because I want him to feel that now that he feels complete with who he is himself, being a gay man. I don't want him to feel like I can't be a part of his life. I don't want him to feel like an outlier. I still want him to be, welcomed and loved and accepted. So it's definitely a different way to put somebody else's shoes on, and to really grow personally and to be a better counselor. I will definitely be a better counselor after having these conversations and going over this stuff. Oh, I did want to say one more thing that's actually specific to Pfizer still. As a counselor, I think it'll be important to not just work with the victims of bullying, but also work with the bullies too. Kind of like we were saying, where if the system perpetuates, that negativity, it's going to keep doing it. But if we can, if the bullies being a bully, finding out why they're doing that. Maybe they're being bullied by somebody else. Maybe they're being abused by somebody else. It doesn't justify it, but like understanding things.
I like that you said that, because when we were talking about against bullying or on loving the queer kids, just for a moment, I was just so impressed with his position, being almost a devil's advocate and being so compassionate to the bullies. And he's saying, what they did was thoughtless. It was harmful. It was mean, but it was thoughtless. It wasn't intentional manslaughter. And that was such an interesting perspective that I don't ever hear, because I do hear the polarizing opinions, and him say, what would it look like if instead of us hating these bullies that we're being conditioned to hate bullies, we just love the queer kids. We love the kids who may be bullied and show them acceptance so that they have confidence and love themselves and know that they have community and support. I thought that his perspective on it was very impressive.
Definitely. Yeah. And by working with queer kids and victims of the bullying, essentially prevent them from becoming bullies later in life, probably. Not that victims always become bullies, but that's how bullies tend to learn how to do their thing. Because somebody did it to them. It's like a social hazing.
And it is eye-opening that nobody's really thinking of huge consequences for these behaviors or for these ways in which we teach kids how they ought to think about other people who are different from them. And the movie that we watched, The Accessory to Murder, really shed light on that, plus that article. Nobody's thinking that somebody's going to take their life when they do something that is mean and is bullying, and is also thoughtless, because they're not thinking that that's going to be the consequence. So telling the story of Ryan Skipper as it was and informing people of the consequences that those actions have, whether or not they intend for them to have those consequences, is important. I feel like part 6 is just really sad. All of it was so sad.
Yeah.
Which article?
Against bullying.
Against bullying?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that one was extremely. Just the beginning. I remember when this came out in the news. I remember hearing about it. But one of the quotes that I wrote down was really good. It says, "These right-wing policies would discriminate against gay adults, but what fuels them is the anxiety that having openly gay men and women teaching and raising kids would make it known to children that being gay is survivable, even joyous condition. And so it's like, for example, they talked about the 23-year-old Seth Stambaugh, who was removed from his fourth grade classroom after his students asked him why he wasn't, or if he was married. And then he said he wasn't married, and I guess they asked him why, and he said because he was gay.
Mm-hmm.
And then the school removed him because they felt like he couldn't perform his job well or whatever. But it's like, imagine if he had stayed in his classroom. You know, in fourth grade, you're what, 9, turning 10?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like these children having an openly gay teacher. And unless these kids are being, you know, taught at home that gay people are bad, if they're not being told anything at home and they're going into school every single day with this teacher who's openly gay, but not to the point where obviously they're not talking about their sex life, or they're talking about they go out every week and do things. They're not talking about that. They're just teaching them. They're a normal person.
Yeah.
They're just a normal person. And on top of that, I don't think it was this one. I think it was the Sue, or it wasn't Sue. It was one of the articles talked about the fact of like people have this idea that gay people have like more sex than heterosexual people,
yes.
which is like not true. If anything, they're like the same amount. It's like, or they think that gay people like talk about sex more. I'm like, that's not true at all. Like, if anything, heterosexual and gay people like talk about sex about the same amount. Not one more than the other. So I don't know what they think that this guy was going to go into his fourth grade classroom and just talk about it or whatever.
Right.
Like
exactly.
Some kind of stereotype of like the overly.
They think they're overly sexual people, and they're
not. Or even, I don't know which article it was. I didn't put it in my notes, but just equating it with pedophilia. With an adult. It's just an adult attracted to other adults, and nothing changes because you're heterosexual or homosexual.
And it goes back to the adoption. Like, a lot of adoption agencies still have discriminatory practice where they won't allow gay people to adopt because for whatever reason they think that, if they adopt children, they're going to turn the children gay, which research has shown that does not happen. And like, personally for me, I'm like, I would rather a kid get adopted by a gay couple than go into the foster care system, because they're more likely to be sexually assaulted by a straight white male than for them to be turned gay. Like,
and that's a point, that people should probably discuss more in that regard of, the stereotype of and discrimination against homosexual couples, gay couples, gay men, or lesbian couples not being able to adopt children, because we have tens of thousands of children that need homes, and so they're in these foster homes where there's 5 or 6 kids in the household. Like you're saying, they're more likely to experience all sorts of abuse in that foster home, instead of being adopted by 2 people that love each other and they want to adopt a child and love a child and provide for this person. That relates to the case of Sharon and Karen a little bit. We'll get to next. That's after this one.
But you're completely right. Like, it doesn't make it. They're more likely to be abused by another kid in the home or by one of the foster parents than to be abused by a gay couple. So.
But, that's where we come as counselors and advocates and allies to. The time and place for these conversations will be there, and we'll just be prepared to say the right words and help people when we can.
Do you want to move into the case of Sharon and Karen?
Sure. This one, honestly, this one made me so sad because we're reading it in a matter of pages. I knew the case, but it's such a long timeline that we're reading in 6 pages. And when I think of them being separated for 3.5 years, and just what harm was done to Sharon just for the sake of trying to stop her from seeming like she was a lesbian, even though none of that was a part of how she cared to be presented. That didn't matter to her, and her care just declining, and that was worth it to her father.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. It makes no sense.
No, and the resources used for that process just to keep her partner away, and how much money was spent on lawyers' fees and costs.
A complete waste of resources just to prevent their adult daughter from being
Yeah.
in the same-sex relationship. Like yeah, a huge waste of time, resources, opportunity for her to, get the right treatment, rehabilitation, start walking and speaking sooner. It's like
It's very frustrating. Like, this might sound stupid, but I watch a lot of Law and Order, SVU, and if it's taught me anything, is that the system does not protect people. I mean, I already knew that, but I already knew that before I watched Law and Order. I've been watching it for years, but it doesn't. I mean, the fact that 3.5 years later, and then they're finally reunited, and then all of like almost the backtracking they have to do to get her back to where she was before.
Right.
Because they put her in a facility where they didn't do anything for her. First, I'm like, how is that facility still allowed to operate?
Absolutely.
First of all, but they didn't do anything for her, and then it's like all that wasted time. I think that's what I was frustrated with. All the wasted time when you could have just let them be together and let her care for her the way she needed to be cared for, because she wasn't harming her.
No, she was massaging her muscles. She was giving her more love than her parents were.
And then what was it? They had a doctor vouch for the family, saying that because Karen. Wait, which one? Because their names rhymed, and so
Karen was an accident.
Okay, so that because Karen was a lesbian, that she was going to like prey on Sharon because she was in a hospital room and and she had to like bathe her, and because of that she would have like molested her or something, and so she shouldn't be allowed in the room with her. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
Yeah,
that was sad, but yeah, it's.
And then giving the power of attorney to some random friend, like, of the family who, like, opposed Karen. Like, oh, we're gonna give her guardianship. Some random woman.
Is bullying is what it is. They're all conspiring against her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's certainly.
And they were using her as a token. They're using her against Karen, essentially.
Yeah. See, it's a woman, so
yeah.
She must be right, because that's a woman.
It eventually, didn't they appeal things? Okay, so yeah, they did appeal and so everything worked out. So let's see. From a counselor's perspective, I try to like write that every now and then. Like, how would I utilize this article? I guess just trying to be an advocate and ally at the same time as listening to individuals that might be going through this kind of situation. And maybe there are doors that can be open for them to have visiting rights and other type of civil rights for their union, but they just don't know about them. So I guess it kind of comes to play where also that problem solver type role as well. Not just be like the listener and put it all on the client, and sometimes they need a little bit of direction and how to get the maybe legal fees reduced, or to find a lawyer that could charge less and help them with this kind of situation.
I think a lot of the readings kind of point to the need as a counselor to be able to have connections with attorneys and know the legal system. It's a hard thing to learn. I happen to have a couple years of litigation under my belt where I learned a lot, and I saw how it does not serve anybody who's not in the majority. It does not serve women. It's oppressive, and if it's oppressive to women, it's oppressive to LGBTQ people even more so. But knowing more about it makes me be able to be a better counselor to someone who requires services for, this is so terrible, but require services and to understand what they're walking into and facing, because it's very traumatic just having to go defend yourself to a total stranger in a robe and feeling like you're not being heard or seen, and you're being misrepresented as far as who your person is and what your intentions are. And I think many of these articles just said the more that we can know about the law, and the more we can know about the legal process, and the more we can know about resources, it will make us the best counselors we can be.
Ready for some students.
I'm trying to figure out where to start.
I think it was pretty nuanced, I would say.
Yeah.
There were so many things that I did. It was helpful to read that wouldn't have been as much at the forefront of my mind if I hadn't read them. Like, sometimes a kid may present as the problem is they're skipping school or their grades are dropping, but what lies underneath may be, because it did say teenagers who are gay tend to skip school more to avoid the persecution that they experience in school. So the problem may not be that they don't want to go to school. There may be something very deep underlying that. And then also, on the flip side, don't presume that a client who is a member of the LGBTQ community is going to encounter the same issues and be experiencing the same things, and don't put that on them before they've actually shared.
I think that, like, that right there is something I've seen over and over again in just other literature about how if you are, especially if you identify a certain way as a counselor, and then you are with a client who is of the same maybe target identity or group, not to, I guess, layman terms, over-relate with them or put onto them what you've experienced because you're part of the same target identity. So if it was, you know, a counselor who's part of the LGBT community, their experiences are not the same as a client who is also part of the same community, and not to put that on them. So you can think that there are similar things they've probably been through, but not exactly, like, maybe if your family, like, cast you aside or cut you off, their family might have embraced them. And they don't have that same experience of having family cut off. So just being mindful if you have an identity that's the same as a client's identity.
Yeah.
So.
That's a great reminder. Just that everybody's experiences are relative to their own personal upbringing, where we might find commonalities, but
I think there's commonalities on, like, somewhat big things, but I think there's like very specific differences.
Yeah, those tend to be the most important sometimes too, like the very specific, like little differences, subtle differences.
Yeah.
I wrote down some interesting stats that I thought were frustrating, essentially sad, but important. 12% of gay men and 13% of bisexual men report sexual assaults, compared to only 2% of heterosexual men. And more than 94% of LGBTQ plus adults reported hate crime victimization. So just the heaviness and intensity, and, like, the fact that essentially everybody who identifies as LGBTQ, has experienced hate crime victimizations, and it's just the people who report it, so it's probably closer to 100%, if it's at 94, and just how, gay men and bisexual men, just like their experiences being so much more, stigmatized and discriminated against than heterosexual men. It's just, I guess, just knowing, just white heterosexual men and cisgender men becoming more aware of this whole other world that individuals live in, and just that conscious raising is important, I guess, as a counselor, in some fashion or form when the opportunities are there to talk about it, to bring awareness for either the person, I guess, who is part of the LGBTQ community, how to develop better coping strategies, or someone who's heterosexual, just to be kind and accepting, and to just, figure out, just to regard these same people as equals. Like, I was going through the students who chapter, just understanding how, there's essentially no differences in how the individuals perform, whether as teachers or parents. That oppression, discrimination is there as a form of fear, and that students who are really conveying that that fear continues to perpetuate, these system patterns.
That is it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say one more thing.
Yeah.
I get at the back of students there's like clinical recommendations or something like that, and something that I wrote down was just for the counselor, just to let's say be aware of my own views regarding sexuality and gender identifications, and how I understand various forms of cisgender and heterosexual privilege. So just understanding my own views and understanding how I experience privilege as a cisgender heterosexual male. That'll help me in becoming a better counselor.
And I think being very open to talk about these things with our peer group, who may not have the same background as us or the same education, and it may stigmatize people. Having those open conversations, especially because we know that the kids take their cues from their parents, and to create help foster more understanding and compassion and acceptance so that it can trickle down, and so we can slowly start eliminating some of the toxic behaviors.
Yeah. And in the Ryan Skipper video, when the friend who was the blonde one who like threw the oranges, when she mentioned, as a white straight female, there were just certain things I didn't understand, things that he dealt with. She was like, I saw it, but she was like, but I didn't relate to it, but I saw it. Or she's like, but then I did see it. And she was like, there are just things you don't think of if you are part of the majority. And even just from the stance of like just being straight, like even I had that conversation with my sister the other night because we just like have weird conversations sometimes, and she had said that she was like, as a straight person, there are just some things you just don't think about. Like she's like, I don't worry about walking down the street with a guy, holding hands, or like public displays of affection. It's like I don't have to worry about like how other people are gonna look at that. She's like, you just don't think about it until one day you do think about it, and then that's all you can think about. Because then you're thinking about the people who do struggle with that, the people who are marginalized because of that. So,
Interesting. I had a conversation with a friend yesterday or the day before, and he was telling me about how he came out to his parents, and just kind of casually we were talking about dating, and he was talking about, without noticing that it wasn't my experience, but he was explaining, how off-limit topics with his parents, and he was saying it so casually. It's just his everyday life that he has to always cater his conversation based on how people are going to treat him. And there's one thing to think about bringing someone home that your loved ones may or may not like based on personality, but knowing that if they are of a certain gender, then they're automatically not going to be accepted, and that's a part of your day-to-day life. And like you said, it's not something that I have to think about in the way that he does every single day. And so it's good to have my eyes opened.
Yeah, it's stressful. That constant tension and pressure of not knowing when someone's gonna yell at them or persecute them.
Yeah. So, and I would even say with that, it's, I'm trying to figure out how to explain this. It's almost at different frequencies and levels depending on where your place is when it comes to privilege. So if you are a straight white female, you have that reel going all the time about, things that play in your head about sexism or things that you can and can't do or whatever. But it's not at the same frequency as, say, a black woman or a black queer woman. Or a black queer man. So there's different, so that reel's always playing in everybody's mind, but I think it's at different frequencies for different target identities and how many intersections you have in your life. Because if you only have one intersection, it's not going to be as high as someone with 3 different intersections.
No, that makes sense. That was a really good explanation.
Well, it almost seems like, I don't know if you guys ever play video games where you're like trying to get across the hot lava or go on the ground across a bridge before parts of it start falling.
Mhm.
But it's like the more levels you add to it, the more areas start falling down, and then you have only these few steps to get across, and you have to walk so carefully, and that's to avoid being insulted or abused or discriminated against very openly, or losing parts of your support system.
Yeah.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that was.
It's,
Well, you two just worked on like a visual. It's really
You're
interesting.
gonna create a storyboard.
Yeah.
No, seriously, I feel like I could like I have no art skills whatsoever, but I could try to draw something like that where like, let's say, white cisgender heterosexual male, like there's less
yeah, like
frequency
a 3-lane
distance.
bridge.
Yeah, it's pretty smooth
No
sailing.
potholes.
Yeah, and then the way you're describing, like, as people become more marginalized within culture, like the road essentially falls apart. Instead of smooth sailing, it's constantly jumping and
you can imagine those reels that play all day, every day in their mind.
Exhausting.
It's very exhausting.
And constantly having to be like aware, not being able to like have a moment to just kind of relax and do like you just do your things. Like, oh, I gotta maneuver around this thing. I gotta maneuver around that one. It's
so you can imagine the frustration of somebody who is gay, who's having this reel playing all the time in their mind every day about what they can and can't do, what they can say, how they dress, things like that. And then somebody who's straight making an offhand comment like, you just need to chill. You just need to relax. Nobody cares anymore.
You're too sensitive.
Whereas that's not true. That's not true. It's not that people don't care. Yeah. Some people just don't talk about it, but they very much care.
Yeah.
So
they behave in a way that they care without saying that they care.
Yes. The only other thing I was going to say about the students too is about when they talked about the gender dysphoria, and how it's in the DSM-5, and it occurs when there's significant distress and impairment resulting from an incongruence between a person's gender identity and assigned gender, and how there are groups that are trying to get it taken out of the DSM. The same way that I guess homosexuality, like the term homosexuality, was in the DSM at one point, and then it got taken out because people rallied against it because it wasn't a mental illness. But I remember when they first put out when they tried to ban transgender individuals from the army, and that was a lot of like the right wing's rhetoric was, oh, it's in the DSM, so then it's a mental illness. And they were trying to use that as, a weapon against them.
Using a systems-based thing as a weapon, even though that system was made by a bunch of white guys.
Men, exactly. Because now that we're in the DSM class and I understand it more, I'm like, well, why should I believe that? Why should I believe gender dysphoria is actually a thing?
It's a good point.
I think
it's a great point.
I mean, incongruence is like, that doesn't necessarily mean you're mentally ill. You just don't identify the way you were born. That's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
a very good point.
Yeah, that's really.
And so the fact that when people use that as a weapon during that whole thing with the transgender ban on the army, I'm like, well, first of all, a lot of you don't even believe in mental illness anyway, but now you're using it as a way to discredit people in this community from serving the country. But you don't believe in the DSM anyway. You don't believe in mental illness.
Yeah.
It's like that, just a very broad societal, institutional form of gaslighting.
Yes.
It's like nailing Jonah to a wall.
I love that.
Shall we? Heterosexual identity development.
I feel like a lot of this was obviously not word for word, but it was very reminiscent of the first thing we read with the the invention of heterosexuality, talking about gender norms, socialization. We conceptualize heterosexual identity development as subordinate and concomitant to the processes involving gender identity development in the Western cultural context. So we conceptualize heterosexual identity development as subordinate. I'm trying to read this and understand it as I'm reading it.
Yeah, that's how some of my notes are too. Like, I'll write them
Yeah.
down. I'm like, how can I use this to talk about?
But the other part I wrote down is the biological sex of an individual elicits an attribution of gender characteristics and prompts social norms for organizing and structuring behavior along those gender lines.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of like the same, like, in Hannah's comedy special when she talked about the fact of the babies, and now she sees a baby girl, or she's like, there's nothing more ridiculous than seeing a baby with a bright pink bow on his bald head.
Yeah.
But parents put these big pink bows in their bald babies' heads because they don't want them to be called baby boys. It's like, well, I'm not going to call it a baby boy or a baby girl. I'm just going to call it a baby.
Yeah. No, I can actually, like presently, a friend of mine, it's more acquaintance. I know her brother, but she has a girl baby that doesn't have much hair, and this baby tends to, have pink, things on her head quite a bit.
Yeah.
Because, I guess the mom feels
really wants everybody to know this is a girl.
Yeah.
They just like accessorizing sometimes, but having had a couple kids and my kids being in different schools that have different populations. I can say there's one school that every little girl is going to have the biggest, heaviest pink bow on their head, and it's a cultural thing, and this like little subculture of decorating your children, and it is a status thing. You must do this.
Oh my goodness.
It is an interesting subculture, and there's some of that, and there's some of them people do want their kids' gender to be known, and I do think what you just read is so interesting because it's like the biology shapes the social aspect and the culture that surrounds the person because of the biology of their born gender and how that affects their identity for their whole life.
Yeah.
Slap that big old bow on. They make wigs for baby girls.
No,
if your baby doesn't have enough hair.
What?
I was looking for my kids had awesome hair patterns, and they lose some of their hair, and then the rest starts growing. So my daughter would have like a rat tail, like a really long one, and my son would have these huge sideburns with no other hair, or this kind of a mohawk that would go. So if you get the tiniest bow to pin them back, then you can get it out of their face. But it is hard to find those, and so when I was looking, this one website sold like tiny bows that would just like pin hair back, and then wigs in case your baby didn't have enough hair. You want to have a family photo session when you wanted this kid to have hair and a bow snapped in there.
I mean,
it was hilarious.
But side note, like unrelated, but like it freaks me out when babies have too much hair. I'm like, a baby has like an appropriate amount of hair. But like I saw a baby with a full head of hair, and it freaked me out because I was like, "There's something not right here." I said that baby has too much hair.
No,
like
maybe it had a baby wig.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised.
That's really funny.
Trying to get the perfect Kodak moments. I also wrote about in that article just it was a little bit different than the first one, but also somebody you were talking about. I forgot the point I was trying to make, but like heterosexuality and the history of the development of those classifications of heterosexual or homosexual. And this article kind of talked a little more how there's a continuum of sexual and gender identities, and it's not so like one way or the other, either male or female. That throughout the article is kind of talking about how there is males who act effeminate that might be cisgender, but might be able to say, hey, that's a good-looking guy, and that kind of stuff. So like it's not so clear as 1 and 2 and things like that. There's more to take consideration, and like we were talking about the I guess just about even mothers that are pressing for like their girls to have like the bows like in the little subpopulations, like they're like the pressing of conformity to like the ultra femininity is something, I guess, not to tell a parent don't do that, but as a counselor I should take consideration. That's their thing, let them do that, but at the same time, if there's an opportunity to maybe talk to a parent about how do you think your child feels about wearing these bows, and just trying to create the conversation. Like, how does the kid feel about what's going on here?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Especially as the kids are getting older and developing and having opinions and wanting to have the freedom to make some choices for themselves.
I mean, it kind of, and we didn't talk about, I don't think, we didn't read anything about it, but it kind of goes into, like, people who are born intersex. Like, and then their parents choose, like, well, I'm either going to choose and make you a boy or a girl, but it's like, you really don't know. Yeah. And so it's like, isn't it better to wait for them to get a little bit older and then figure out how do they identify, or do they just identify as intersex? Like, is that just it? Which is fine. And it's kind of like, in Hannah's comedy special, she talked about, like, can't we just kind of give them a good, like, 9 years and then see where they land? Like, just wait and see.
Right.
Give them the freedom to figure it out.
Yes.
Yeah, and we're at an hour now.
Okay.
So we're making good time.
We are. So go on to accessory to murder. Because we talked about it a little bit already.
Yeah, we did talk about it quite a bit.
I guess something that I could say is just the importance of, like you were talking about earlier, how Polk County refused to allow that theatrical play to take place to share Ryan Skipper's story, to bring awareness to the issue. That type of systemic oppression and control needs to change. And that's just like a theme that I found in the video. Is just that gay hatred crime becomes a theme in which the victim of a gay hatred crime becomes a person. The person that the victim of the gay hatred crime basically becomes a person who is asking for it, where they were doing something. They become painted as some degenerate member of society because they're homosexual, even though they did absolutely nothing wrong. Just being a homosexual person somehow justifies their persecution, being abused, and so it's something that.
And I don't know which interviewee said this, but it was almost like we're totally ignoring the reality of what was done to him, and we for some reason think if we sweep it under the rug by saying he was out cruising for sex. Well, and she kind of said, say all the things you used to slander him so that you wouldn't have to look at the ugly truth of this murder were true. Say he was a fraud and he was stealing money, creating these checks. Say he was out cruising for sex. Say these things are true. Is the consequence for him to be stabbed 20 times, more than 20 times, and have his throat cut? Did those balance out? They absolutely don't, but for some reason, because he's gay, we think we can say that there are these infractions, and then so he brought it on himself to be very just brutally murdered. And that doesn't get called into question enough.
Yeah. I think something interesting, and it wasn't mentioned, but the fact that people tend to, when they think of Florida, they just tend to think of Disney. And, like, we're not really, like, a southern state. But I'm like, no, we really are. There's some, I'm like, there's some parts of Florida. Like, I went to a lantern festival back in February, and I had to drive to South Florida, but closer to the west, down close near the Everglades. But there were some towns I drove through, one stoplight. There were some places I drove through, and I was with a white friend, and I was like, I would not drive through here by myself. I got to one traffic light, and this big truck came through with a Confederate flag. And I was like, I couldn't live here. And so some people, when they think of Florida, they think of Orlando, in which his mother did want him to move to Orlando because she felt like he'd be safer in Orlando. But then one of the interviewees said, maybe he would have been safe in Orlando, but it's like you drive 30 minutes east, south, northwest, whatever, you're in the country of Florida. Like, you're in these small towns. Like, even driving to the beach, I live in Stanford, and I drive through, like, Osteen and Geneva. to get to the beach, and those are small country, little Florida country towns, super country people there.
Yeah, it's patchy, and I know the route I drove that over the summer, and that's exactly right. And there's that area, then there's North Florida, which is like lower Alabama, and it's not.
You mean like up near the Panhandle and stuff? Yeah. Yeah. So people don't think about those areas in Florida.
It's heavy. There's definitely heavy racism and discrimination. When I was in Tallahassee, I had to do a practicum for family child sciences. We would go to like 45 minutes to an hour outside Tallahassee, like southeast of Taylor County, and like they would tell us at this middle school, like almost a couple times a year, they would literally have like these huge fights. Would be like all the white kids and all the black kids would just pick a side and have like huge town like rumbles, and it was like something that could have happened like any time when I was over there. And it was just so sad to know like these people are trapped in like this poison information that just keeps spreading. They're not getting out of this discrimination. It's terrible. So I don't know. Hopefully it was helpful in some fashion in that community, but it's tough. So it's finding ways to this is systems based. So just getting involved with the system as counselors and understanding how we can be involved.
Yeah, like getting involved in like, not just like the big governmental level, but even the local level. Like as simple as voting. Don't forget to vote if you haven't. But yeah, just stuff like that. And I thought it was interesting they talked about like cities, like big cities are the safest places for people in the LGBT community. Like, and Orlando's not a huge city, but it's still safer than Polk County.
Oh, for sure.
So
one of the readings I read, it was a trans man moved to Atlanta because he was safer there, could have community there, lost his job, had to move back. Oh no, it was a trans woman, and she had to move back home. And then when she's living in a small town with her mom, she was less safe, and she had to hide all of her women's clothes with her friend so that nobody would accost her because she was less safe there, as opposed to being in a big city.
And the other thing from that was somebody said we teach our children from an early age that the LGBT are second class and that they are to be feared and hated. And one of the quotes that Dr. Norsworthy said that was really good is that we live in a society in which the hate and fear of gay people is woven into the fabric of the culture.
It really is, and it really is society. And I don't have I have a sample of 2 kids in my life, so this is not a research study, but they 100% take their cues off of how I react to a person and treat a person. And so I was at Fringe one year, and there's kind of this moment where it's kind of shifting from being kid friendly to being adult time.
Oh yeah.
And so there was a drag queen who tells these ghost stories, and she's larger than life, of course, but she has like this kind of ghoulish but very sparkly costume, and she's so tall and was wearing platform shoes. But she came over and said hi, and my kids had never seen a costume like that before, but I was normal and treated her like you treat anybody, and she was super sweet to the kids and talked to them, and because I was comfortable, they were comfortable. And what they noticed was, of course, my daughter wanting her sparkly shoes, and just that they made a friend, and they didn't even ask me a single question about it when we left. They just
they're just accepting of the person, and
right. But if I were to say negative things and react negatively, that would be their impression. That's what they would carry from that moment forward,
and then perpetuate that on others.
Absolutely,
yeah. That's such a good point. Thanks. Do you want to move on to the next one?
Sorry, I'm not trying to be rude. My dad texted me. It might be important.
No problem. The Rolling Stone article on the CNN.
Yeah. I wrote down some. I found because I find that when I'm watching the videos, I have to like watch it and then go back and find the quotes later because I can't write it and watch it. I can't.
It's hard.
Even in class, I can't like listen and write at the same time. I have to just listen and then just try to remember whatever's good and go back and write it later because I just won't be able to. So I went back later and I found some quotes from Hannah's comedy special. And so one thing she said is that the self-deprecating humor for someone that already lives in the margins isn't humility, it's humiliation. And then the part that really got me was when she talked about what her mom told her. And she said, what my mom eventually said to me was pretty much at the core of why I'm questioning comedy. She said to me, the thing I regret is that I raised you as you were straight. I didn't know any different. I'm so sorry. I know well before you did that your life was going to be hard. I knew that, and I wanted more than anything in the world for that to not be the case. And now I know that I made it worse. I made it worse because I wanted you to change because I knew the world wouldn't. And I was like, damn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was like...
Her mom tried to protect her, but inadvertently, it didn't protect her.
Right.
Man, it's. I mean, I don't know what it's like to be a parent, but gosh, it's tough because you want to protect your children, and you know that there's a possibility that they're not going to be part of the majority, and
it's like you're doing everything you can to push them into that,
yeah,
to push them into the majority,
to protect them.
You think you're sparing them because you see the discrimination, and then they've lost you as someone who would support them.
Yeah.
So, but I guess it was also hopeful to see how important it was for her mom to come to that conclusion, like how big that was. Like,
yeah.
When Hannah, like when her mom shared that, she's like, wow, like all the talks and the struggles, like kind of became a bit more worthwhile, knowing that at least her mom was like definitely there with her and like could really try to understand and in a deeper and different type of way understand her daughter better.
Yeah. And then when she talked about when she was assaulted, and when the guy thought that she was a guy hitting on his girlfriend, and then confronted her, and then realized it was a woman, was like, oh, never mind. But then she's at the end of the special came back and said, I didn't tell you the whole story. He actually came back and beat the shit out of me. We realized, well, you're not an actual lady, you're a gay lady. So
they didn't have any human rights anymore.
Yeah,
right.
Here she had been like a feminine dressing woman. Well, first of all, he wouldn't have realized she was gay if she dressed feminine because we associate gay women with dressing like men anyway, which isn't true. So, but because she dressed the way she did, then it was suddenly, it's okay.
That goes back to you're no longer under
the protection. Yeah. Because you choose to be a lesbian.
And so this is your fault.
Yes.
That I'm going to assault you.
Even though she did nothing to hurt somebody, affect somebody, offend somebody, just being herself and dress a certain way, look a certain way. She
was somehow threatening to him because it all goes back to feeling afraid of that power.
Yeah.
She had so many good quotes.
Yeah, she did. I only got like 5 of them, but there's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, and she at the beginning too. She was talking about how in Tasmania, like she grew up in a small town, and we're gonna talk about like Polk County, where like she grew up in a small town, and she just did not feel safe, and then she grew up like in a more like religious area.
Yeah,
the Bible Belt of Tasmania.
Yeah, so she felt compelled to move and not come back. So that disassociation of her like. Herself, right? Her cells are split, where she couldn't be her, hometown individual. She couldn't identify being, oh, that's my hometown. I lived there, grew up there. Like, that sucks. Like, I know it's not a good adjective, but I grew up in Orlando, and at one point it was kind of a smaller town, different suburbs, and to feel like I couldn't go back to where I grew up because I was a gay man. Like that would suck. That would just be so terrible to like not feel that connection, that appreciation that I have, like in the town that I grew up in, like the environment. For someone not to have that, that as a counselor, I mean, I thought about that right now. I mean, that's a whole other perspective as a counselor. Like, for somebody not to feel like they have like some hometown kind of roots in some way or fashion because they were always an outlier.
Well, I mean, it's almost like grief counseling you have to do with them. It's like if you have somebody who's gay who's been outcast from not just their actual home but from their community, they've lost a part of themselves, so they're grieving probably that part of themselves. So it's like, as a counselor, it's partly grief counseling you're probably doing as well, but a different kind of grief counseling because they're not dead, they're still alive. They just want nothing to do with you.
Yeah, but that separation causes grief, and you can't be with the people
who raise you.
That raise you, and that you want them to love you, and vice versa. But,
or even how exhausting it would be just to come back to a hometown that may embrace you, but you lived there and you hadn't come out yet, and then moving away, coming back, you're reintroducing yourself, and having to answer questions and having to introduce a partner if you have one, and how that would be so exhausting to have to do all of that.
That might be
it's easier to stay. Easier to stay where you got to be yourself.
That might be why my Sunday school teacher, JD, like hasn't really reconnected too much because he came out, well after he had left, Orlando area, and he's probably just terrified of coming back to his community, which is a more religious community. But he just needs to know that we love him, we want him to hang out with us. Man, it kind of gets me a little teary-eyed.
When she had talked about, because you had mentioned that she said she grew up in the small town in Tasmania, and that when she had said that being gay was illegal up until 1997, in my mind I was thinking, oh, gay marriage. That's what I was thinking. So I was like, oh, gay marriage. That was later than it should have been. I mean, the United States didn't do it until 2016, but yeah, I was like, oh, and then when I realized, no, like being gay was illegal up until 1997. Then I was like, oh, that changes everything. Because it's not just marriage. It was like just being gay, like letting other people know you're openly gay. That was like a crime, not just like a sin. It was a crime by law. So that's why I was like, oh, okay, I understand.
That's like a whole other level of fear. You go to jail for...
It's almost like the Salem witch trials. Like, oh, she's a witch. Like, oh, they're gay.
Yeah.
Like your neighbor's turning you in.
Oh my goodness.
Or, that movie that came out about Alan Turing that Cumberbatch played, is a World War II film where he was a gay man that helped basically solve like a Nazi code that they were using.
Familiar. The last name sounded familiar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Cumberbatch's character is basically a homosexual man that hadn't come out because basically English law at the time was if you were gay, it was a criminal act, and they would do chemical castration or give you like chemicals to basically try to make you, heterosexual, and he ended up passing away. He took his own life because he was so depressed and distraught. But it wasn't. Oh, sorry.
I started watching that movie. I was like, at one point, I would never have gotten through because I never had any more retention.
Well, now you have a different perspective. You'll be able to finish it different. But if it wasn't for this individual, we probably would have all been suffering under Nazism. And this man, this individual, helped save the world. And his story wasn't told actually really until the book and the film came out now. And so it kind of goes back to we can't separate the person from the art or the performance that they did. It's important to
You tell the whole story.
Yeah, you can't talk about Freddie Mercury and Queen's music without also talking about Freddie Mercury's personal life and living as a gay man. I'm not sure. I could probably keep ranting about that. But...
Do you want to talk about the North Carolina law?
Yes,
okay.
Sure.
So the North Carolina Governor Cooper signed a bill repealing House Bill 2, the famously anti-LGBT law enacted last year that subjected the state to widespread condemnation, boycotts, and lawsuits. And that was the law barring transgender people from using public restrooms consistent with their gender identities. So I remember I got into so many arguments with people over this. Yeah.
I remember those discussions. They'd be so outlandish too. I mean,
it was super ridiculous.
Yes.
It was. I mean, and I hate to I hate to call the group out, but it is what it is. It was mostly conservatives. It was mostly Christians.
Yeah, I know. I have
and I trouble not doing it because it's just like, but that was the group doing it. I didn't have any friends who identified as liberals or Democrats who were doing this. It was conservatives that I'm friends with who were making these outlandish. I don't want my children in bathrooms with a man who thinks he's a woman. And I'm like, first of all, that's not how that works. And there's so many
layers. And just the concern that they had, and that's again being gay, being transgendered is not being a pedophile. And I don't know why those are so interchanged in that discussion in particular. And can you imagine being a trans woman and being forced to use a men's restroom?
Yeah.
Do you think that's where you're going to be accepted and treated kindly and feel safe? I sure don't.
And I mean, even when we were in the group for gender, they talked about the rights that transgender individuals still don't have. And it's like, if they are arrested and you are a trans woman and you're put in a men's prison, then they're not...
A very dangerous situation.
Yeah.
It really comes... But I'm starting to recognize more between recent stuff that's going on between banning transgender individuals from going to the military, and now I guess the census. One of our classmates posted something with the most recent census will not include, I guess, categories that allow LGBTQ individuals to, I guess, become more. I guess they would become categorized. They want to be on the census. So they can be recognized as a population group and not as just a subpopulation that's not worthy enough to be on the census. So that's a major issue that you could be white, black, Hispanic, but you can't indicate your gender or sexuality preference. And so something that I've been thinking about, I mentioned in other videos, that if somebody it sets a precedent where. We also have immigrant children that are basically in jail cells and Walmart warehouses. And so I was reading that and not allowing transgender people sets a precedent. So precedent where who's the next group that's going to lose their rights to be free, to vote, to walk around the streets. So it's a scary thing that whoever's in power gets to say, oh, well, you have human rights, you don't have human rights. And that's what the Constitution essentially says, that, basically our rights are from nature, and nature is God, essentially. I know there's definitely issues with the Constitution, but it's basically saying that our rights as human beings don't come from another human being. Our rights come from nature, from the universe. Our rights are above, another human being telling us what our rights can be. And so that's something I like about the Constitution in that regard. But what's scary is if somebody doesn't have the right to pick up, and bear arms and protect their country, and they don't have the right to defend themselves and their loved ones, then they're not being categorized as an equal human being. And that's completely wrong. And that's a slippery slope to just some crazy stuff that could happen. I mean, I guess crazy stuff's already happened, but we're taking steps forward. These are steps being taken back. I kind of rant a little too long. That makes sense, I guess. Sometimes I'll just and I'll lose my point.
No, that's okay.
So thank you. So I don't know. I just it's a human rights, civil rights issue.
No, I get what you're saying though, because there's a quote, and I don't remember exactly, but there's a quote where, it's, I think the person who said it was during the occupation in Germany,
Mm-hmm.
when the Nazis were rounding up all the Jewish people, and this person said, like, when they came for the Jewish people, I said nothing. When they came for the gypsies, I said nothing. When they came for the homosexuals, I said nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And when they came for me, there was no one to defend me.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, so I get what you're saying. It's like when we start taking it from different people, like, where does it stop? Or like, who speaks up for them? Which kind of goes into the whole, like, as counselors, what is our job to do? Advocate, obviously, but I feel like now it's not just advocating, because, like, I can talk as much as I want to, but it's like I need to do something. Like, I can't just keep, like, I can advocate, but I can also do something at the same time. So.
Agreed.
What's really cool that it's not on here, but my pre-practicum is with Planned Parenthood, and I went to a youth summit over the weekend. It was like an LGBT youth summit, and so it was at Valencia College. But the building they were using for the summit, they made all the bathrooms. They were not gendered bathrooms, so anybody could use whatever bathroom. So I thought that was interesting, just because we're talking about a bathroom bill. But they were like, oh, it's like whatever you, like, if you identify, it's like if you're trans, if you identify, whatever, it doesn't matter. Whatever bathroom you're comfortable going in, use that bathroom.
So if they felt like you're cisgender heterosexual man, you can share a bathroom with cisgender heterosexual women.
They didn't get into detail. They were just like,
do whatever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They just removed the label, like, and I think they covered the sign with, like, the sign that said these are neutral bathrooms, like, whatever. So, and I know they have neutral bathrooms here on campus, and they have them at UCF as well. But yeah,
That's a great option to do that.
Yeah.
Just create gender neutral bathrooms.
I was, over the weekend, I was at a wedding, and in the place where they got married, there was a bathroom that was kind of gender neutral. Like, one side was women, one side was men, and there was just a hall straight down the middle, and so you could go on either side, and each stall was just like its own entire bathroom. But nobody could tell that when they walked in the restroom. I was waiting for one of my kids, so I got to watch everyone's reaction. The men coming in, seeing me standing there, and being totally confused and thinking they're in the wrong bathroom, and then walk back out. And then I would actually explain to every person who came in how the bathroom worked, and it was such a foreign concept. People wouldn't even go to the bathroom; they would leave sometimes. But I think if more were neutral, then people would just, I mean, come on, you're not. They're stalls. Calm down. But it was an interesting social experiment.
Society, I guess there are aspects that obviously things are into place for certain aspects of protection, but within, I guess, a bathroom type setting. But it is, I guess, kind of almost silly to an extent when, like, adults are so uncomfortable around, like, using the bathroom on each other. It's really not that big of a deal. But society just makes it a big deal.
Yeah.
And then when it should, it's just like eating. It's just a little different. You know?
I go in the men's bathroom when the women's bathroom's full.
I do too, and I do it by accident a lot too.
Like,
once a year, usually.
I'm like, look, I have to go. And if the women's bathroom's full, they have the same stuff in the men's bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
I've gone to the women's restroom a couple times.
And it's not that big of a deal.
It isn't a big deal.
No, cultural things just definitely make it a much bigger deal. But it was kind of funny, real quick, at the old Orlando Magic Arena, on the corners, they would have the restrooms of the arena, and one side of the arena, like the restroom sides would switch, and I was a little kid, and I was like, oh, I'm going to the restroom. I started walking down the hallway, there's nobody, and I just walk into, like, this room full of women, and I'm like, oh, I'm in the wrong bathroom, and it was just, like, I shouldn't have been embarrassed because I made a mistake, but it was just like, there was, like, such a fear of being, like, in the wrong restroom when, like, I don't know, it's just, I guess kids just learn certain things, and it's just learning, I guess, teach kids to be smart, and, you know, if a stranger tries to touch you, scream and yell the other way.
Yeah.
And that goes for all settings, whether it's the street or bathroom or whatever. Just
And most parents get to the bathroom with their
Right.
children.
Yeah, I take my son in
Yeah.
the women's restroom sometimes.
That's why is when we see little boys in the bath, even if they're standing by themselves, I'm like, oh, they're waiting on their mom.
Mm-hmm.
Like even if I see like a little bit older children, I'm like, oh, they're waiting on their mom. And It's not a big deal.
Right, and there's
Yeah.
stall doors and things.
And that's the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'd rather have my boy safe and be in the the women's restroom, or my daughter safe in the guys' restroom.
Well, even not just safety, if they need anything.
Yeah.
You're not going to go storming. Just walk past the urinals.
Well, like
Pardon me, sirs.
No, yeah. It's true. Yeah. I would just, or like if I had to use the restroom, I wouldn't want like my daughter just like waiting outside like by herself in the hallway while I'm using the guys' restroom. Like I'd want my kid to
Mm-hmm.
be there with me and things like that. So
You want to do the last one?
Yes.
last one. Oh yeah, last one. Supreme Court ruling in favor of same-sex marriage. Major step forward for LGBTQ rights, federally allowing same-sex marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Supreme Court Justice wrote Kennedy,
Yeah.
who'd been serving for a long time, and through his his wisdom and understanding the law of rights, he voted in favor of.
Which was surprising, knowing his track record.
Mm-hmm.
It's surprising that he did, because it was a 5-4 ruling,
Mm-hmm.
and he wrote for the majority with the 4 liberal justices. Each of the 4 conservative justices wrote their own dissent. But a quote that they quoted Justice Anthony Kennedy, what he said, and one part of what he said was, their hope is not to be condemned to live in loneliness, excluded from one of civilization's oldest institutions. They ask for equal dignity in the eyes of the law. The Constitution grants them that right. And I thought that was really touching, the fact, like, just that line of, like, their hope is to not be condemned to live in loneliness. And just the thought of, like, if it wasn't legal, like, to live your whole life being in love with this person and then not being allowed to, not being able to because your country says you can't.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fact that the justices, there was one of the justices who was opposed to the ruling, and he said that, yeah, we can, I forgot exactly what he says, but he's like, you can put this on whatever, or this or that, but don't bring the Constitution into this, because it has nothing to do with the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
Which I'm like, has everything to do with the Constitution.
Mm-hmm. It's
But
the law of the land that's creating a system that prevents people from having equal rights.
and like, and the Constitution is not foolproof. It's like, that's why so many amendments.
Exactly.
Like,
It's a
why
living
are there so
document.
many?
Yes.
I mean, just the fact that you look at like the 13th Amendment alone,
Mm-hmm.
like, we won't have slavery, so we'll have the 13th Amendment. Slavery by another name, but we won't have, like,
Even
slavery.
yeah, sorry. I was interrupting. Apologize.
No.
I was just thinking about the 13th Amendment, how that needs to be amended.
Yeah, it does. The 13th Amendment needs to be amended. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No,
I'll
it's true.
forget
It's true.
something I'm trying to say. But,
Yeah. But just the fact of, like, the Constitution is not complete. Like, it's not,
Right.
and it's whatever, like, the way it was written. It's like, that's why we have so many amendments.
yeah, it's not a foolproof, guaranteed, clear cut. This is the perfect way.
It must be amended, therefore.
Yes.
I took away some of just how the things that people don't think about when they're opposing gay marriage and still oppose gay marriage. That it's not just about the union and the marriage; it's about the rights of that case with the couple, John Arthur and his partner. And Arthur died, and then his partner couldn't be on the death certificate. And now in your grief, you're also fighting for that simple right. Or a gay couple who wants to adopt, but the state law is that you must be married to give a child a loving home, and you're not allowed to do that. And therefore you're not allowed to be a parent through adoption. And just those many rights that are lost if you're not allowed to get married. And reading through those, it's just, again, I can't imagine how difficult and exhausting that is.
That. economic, privileges too. Being able to be married, save on taxes, mortgages. Just that constant battle that's forcing non-heterosexual individuals to just live in like perpetual like difficulty.
Yeah. Like when I was thinking about it, it's just like even when you were just talking now, I was thinking like, why is it that make people's lives so freaking difficult? Like it's just making people's life, and it has nothing to do with you.
Absolutely,
and that was the biggest thing for me. Is like when it comes to gay marriage or people who are trans or anything like that. I'm like, it literally has no effect on your life whatsoever. And I remember telling somebody when gay marriage was being legalized, and I was like, I don't care in the sense of like it doesn't affect my life. I'm so happy that gay people can get married now. I'm like, but I'm gonna wake up tomorrow and put on my pants one leg at a time like I did today. Like the world is not suddenly rolling out of the universe into an abyss. Like we're going to go on the same way we have. It's just now gay people have the right to get married.
Yeah, those people are going to be happier and more hopeful, and it's actually going to make society more prosperous and successful when people aren't spending energy on trying to survive, and when they spend energy living instead of trying to survive, then we can keep moving forward and develop new technology innovation. Who knows how many individuals in the course of history that were stigmatized and oppressed because they were gay could have gone on to be like another Alan Turing who would change the course of human history by their individual accomplishments, but they were held down simply because they weren't heterosexual. Like that's
I think just what you said, it doesn't affect you, but your strong opinion is making someone's life very, very difficult and very sad when they're not thinking about the individuals, and maybe they wouldn't care, but maybe they would. And I think Hannah, she had this quote that she said, laughter is not our medicine, stories hold our cure. And I think hearing the stories and learning about the people and not the statistics is so much more powerful.
Yeah, she said like the stories were the true medicine, like the laughter is like the sweet outside, but in order to get to like the true medicine, you gotta like hear the stories and learn their value.
Sounds good.
I think that's a good note to end on.
No, that was a good team effort. Alrighty. That was awesome working with you all. Those are cool pictures of these.
I just thought I would